Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another video in Tatreez 101. I'm Ruba, and in this series of videos we're talking about Palestinian embroidery or Tatreez. Today we will take a look at Tatreez patterns and motifs, how to read a pattern, and what information can we get from it so we are better equipped to turn it from a pattern on paper to a Tatreez on fabric. Also, we will talk about some resources. Alright, let's start. Now in Palestinian embroidery we have two main styles. One based on the cross stitch or the fallahi stitch, and the other one is based on the couching or tahriri stitch. Let's start with the fallahi or cross stitch. For this one, the pattern is like any cross stitch pattern, will be drawn on a grid. We call it a chart. Each square on the chart or your grid will be a square on the fabric. The grid sometimes will be divided into group of 10 for easy counting and gridding. You can also see sometimes small numbers on top and on the side to help you count the number of stitches in width and in length. You can also see a small arrow on the top and on the side pointing at the center of the design. That way, if you want to center your design on the fabric, you know which point to start from, or if you would like to start from the middle, this would be your point. And like I said before, each square on the chart represents a square on the fabric, and each colored square or a square with a symbol represent a stitch on the fabric. Different colors, of course, or different symbols represent different colors of thread or different stitches if my chart contains more than just the cross stitch. If my chart contains stitches other than the cross stitch, then my chart will have to use different symbols for these stitches and explain that in the key that comes with the chart. Otherwise, you just assume that every colored square is a cross stitch. Sometimes the pattern or the chart comes in black and white, and in this case they use different symbols to represent the different colors or different stitches. Now by looking at the chart we can tell that we have different colors or different stitches. To know the exact color or color codes that were used in this pattern or the different stitches that were used if there is any other than the cross stitch, then you have to look at something we call the key, which comes with every chart. Now the key comes with a lot of information, but the main thing we are looking for here is an explanation for these different colors or different symbols on the grid and what do they represent. So as you can see here, we have all these symbols or different colors listed over here, and right next to it we have the exact color code for each of these symbols or different colors. Now sometimes the key can tell you other information like the name of the thread color, how many strands were used, the length of the thread that we needed to complete these stitches, and how many stitches we did using that particular thread. Now the key can also have information like the type of fabric and the count of fabric that were used, the size of the needle, the brand for the threads that were used, and how many strands, the number of stitches in width and in length, the size or the dimensions of your design in inches or in centimeter. It can also tell you information about what other stitches were used in this particular design, and so much more. Now let's take a quick look at another example. Now this is not a Palestinian embroidery pattern, but it is a cross stitch pattern and it works the same way. You have your design drawn in a grid. The grid is divided into a group of 10. You have the arrow pointing at the middle or the center of your design, and then here on this side you have the key which explains some information like the design dimension in inches and in centimeter, how many stitches we have in width and in length, the type of fabric were used and the count, and then we have the needle size, the type of thread, DMC threads, and how many floss or like how many strands were used. And then you can see here in the key each symbol or each color and what exactly is the color code for that. And then here on the side it shows you that they used also backstitch and what symbols they used for that and what colors they used for these stitches as well. And like I said before, if your key or your chart does not tell you that there were other stitches used, then you assume that each square on the chart is a cross stitch. Now, since we are talking about Palestinian traditional motifs, which mostly reached us through oral documentations by artists and Tatreez researchers who went around from town to town and asked women about their thobes and motifs and colors and all of that information and recorded it for us, you might notice that these motifs patterns are not as detailed as the one that I mentioned earlier. But the main thing that we are looking for, which is the drawing or the motif done on a grid or a chart, is there. The rest of the information, we can do it ourselves. We can do the counting and all of that information that we need by ourselves. Also, you might notice that there isn't a lot of emphasis on mentioning the colors for these motifs. And there are many reasons for that, but the main one is that colors in Palestinian embroidery was usually something that is left up to the woman based on her taste. What does she want her thobe to look like? Or based on her village style. Some villages were known to use certain colors more than others. For example, the area of Ramallah, they were known to use the color red, while the area of Al Khalil, for example, they would use a different shade of red, a kind of like a brown orange red color. So either she would choose the colors based on her taste or what is commonly known in her village at the time, and there isn't a real link between the motif itself and the color. So what I mean by that, a certain motifs, like for example the star motif, does not have to be done in a certain color. It can be any color. It can be red, blue, green, whatever you want. So that's why you see a lot of these patterns, it does not emphasize or mention what colors were used for this, because it usually differs from one woman to another, from one village to another, and so on. So let me show you a few examples from some of the books that I have, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is the first book. It's called دليل التطريز الفلسطيني, or A Guide to Palestinian Embroidery. It's done by two Palestinian artists, Nabil Anani and Sliman Mansour. And as soon as you open this book, you can see that we have the motifs or the drawings done on a grid, but you can quickly see that the grid itself does not have a lot of details. So to find the number of stitches you need in width and in length, you have to do the counting yourself. Also, there is no indication of where is the center of this design. So you have to find a lot of this information yourself basically, but it does mention some other information like the name of the motif, the location that this motif was used in on the thobe. So for example, was it used on the sleeves, chest panels, side panels, or somewhere else, the area that it was used in. Although I would have to say that some of these motifs were used in many areas, and I would have preferred if they mentioned that. And last but not least, they mention here some color codes for this motifs, but these color codes are just suggestions in my opinion, and you have to be aware that these color codes are not always accurate. So for example, if we look at this motif over here, you will see that in the color key area they mention two colors, which is red and black. But if you look at the grid itself, we have three colors. We have red, orange, and blue. So which one is which? We don't know. Why the grid showed more colors than the actual color key? Also, we don't know. Maybe when they recorded these motifs from the thobes, they couldn't figure out the exact color codes for these colors, or maybe it was just a mistake, or maybe they wanted to do more colors on the grid to make it more clear. I honestly don't know what is the reason, but in all the cases, it's just something to be aware of when you are working with these type of books, and you can always choose your own colors to do these motifs. Or if you want to do some traditional colors, you can always take inspiration from thobes or images of thobes and choose colors based on that. Now the second book I'm gonna show you is Palestinian Embroidery Motifs 1850 to 1950, A Treasury of Stitches by Margarita Skinner. And in this book they don't even show the grid at all. They use the X symbol to kind of represent the X stitches, and they show the patterns that way. So basically they draw the motif using the X stitch, and again you have to find the information yourself. You have to do the counting to find how many stitches you need in width and length and all of that. But it does mention the name of the motif and the areas that it was used in. And the last book I'm gonna talk about is this one. It's called Tatreez الفلسطيني, or Palestinian Embroidery by Widad Kawar and Tanya Nasser. And in this book they don't show grid at all. You have the design stitched directly on the fabric. So you have some chest panels, side panels, back panels, and so on. And to copy these motifs or these designs, you just have to do the counting and copy the stitches you see in front of you on your fabric. It's not always easy to work with these type of books because sometimes the stitches can not be as clear, but it's still a book that you can copy some of these designs from. So these are just a few examples of traditional motifs, patterns, and what to expect from them. And like I said earlier, they might not be as detailed, but you can still pull the information that you need. Let's now talk about the second style of embroidery, which is the couching stitch. For this one, it's actually pretty simple. You can draw the design you have, or freestyle it on the fabric. And of course we have some traditional motifs here as well, and they have their own meanings and symbolism. But to find out about these, you can always look at some of these traditional thobes and copy these designs from them. So basically you would have a design something like this. You just transfer it into the fabric or draw it on your fabric, and then you trace it with your thread, and then you have another thread to hold it in place, or something simple like this. And that's pretty much what you need to do. You can either draw the design on the fabric and then start stitching, or if you feel confident enough, you can always freestyle it on the fabric directly. So that's how you do the patterns for the couching or the tahriri stitch. Okay, we keep saying traditional motifs, they have their own symbolism and meanings. So what exactly does that mean? Well, motifs are these little symbols, designs, drawings, whatever you want to call them, that Palestinian women use to create their majestic designs on their thobes or dresses. Some of these motifs represented plants, animals, religious beliefs, historical events, marital status, wishes, and more. Basically, things from their surroundings or their experiences. So a Palestinian woman would handpick what motifs she wants to place on her thobe or dress to show her village pride, her skills, her wishes, things she liked, amulets for protection, traditions, whatever she wanted to communicate, she just stitched on her dress. Of course, there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of documenting and researching these motifs and their meanings, and that's why if you are a Palestinian, it is important that you ask your parents or your grandparents to keep these traditions and knowledge alive so we can pass it to the next generation, inshallah. Before we end this video, let's quickly check a few resources that would give us an access to some of these traditional motifs. The first one are books. Books are always great resources, and there are so many books about Palestinian embroidery. But the one that I will talk about here are the ones that have Palestinian traditional motifs patterns. If you are interested in reading about Palestinian embroidery, I made a post a few years ago on my website listing some of these books and giving a little description about each one of them. So if you are interested, you can check it out. I will leave the link in the description down below for you. You can go and read it if you want. But for today, we will just talk about the ones that has patterns in them. So the first three books which we talked about earlier are the دليل التطريز الفلسطيني by سليمان منصور and Nabil Anani, Palestinian Embroidery Traditional Falahi Cross Stitch by Widad Kawar and Tanya Nasser, and Palestinian Embroidery Motifs Treasury of Stitches by Margarita Skinner. And this book, which I'm not gonna try to say the name, this is a book that is written in German. I don't understand German, so I cannot approve or disapprove the information in this book. I tried a few years ago to translate some of the pages, but I gave up. But it does have some patterns that you could use. Of course, there are other books about Palestinian traditional motifs, but these are some of the ones that I use, and they do have a lot of traditional patterns that you could use. Next are online resources, and there are plenty of resources online. There are so many Palestinian artists who either sell or offer their patterns for free, so you can check them out. I will make a list of some of these artists and post it on my Instagram this coming week, so keep an eye for that. We also have this website called Turazan Initiative, which has a huge library of motifs, and they categorize it and organize it in different ways. You can look up motifs based on the area or the colors, or based on the type of motifs like an animal, plant, or something else. So it's a great resource for these traditional motifs. So if you have time, go check them out. Next, you can always make your own design either by hand on a graph paper or using a software like WinStitch or MacStitch, BC Stitch, KG Chart, and others. There's a lot of softwares that can help you do these cross-stitch patterns. So some of them are paid, some of them are free, so you can check them out and see what works for you. Last but not least, you can always check my website, leonorastudio.com. I do have a few patterns that you can download for free. You can also download the graph papers if you want to make your own. And I also sell some of my patterns on my Etsy shop, so if you have time, please do check it out. And that takes us to the end of this video. I know, this video took longer than I anticipated, but there's so much to talk about and we only scratched the surface. But I at least hope that you have a better understanding of Tatreez patterns now, how to read them and where to find them. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and next week we will talk about Tatreez stitches. Until then, please make sure to share, like and subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in the next video, inshallah. Bye.